Thank you for tuning into this video about imperialism, especially in its effects on Africa. Now, we're talking about imperialism from the perspective of Europeans who are actually doing the imperialism. Now, this will be a bit of a lengthy discussion we're going to get through on this video. But before that, I just wanted to thank you all for being on such good behavior with the substitute teacher. I know it can be difficult to be without your normal teacher, and it's difficult for me not to be there. But of course, my son had to have surgery, and we're hoping everything goes really well with that. So I'm over probably right at this moment at the Marshfield Clinic, hoping for the best. Anyway, let me share a little bit with you about what it was like with Europeans in their colonization or scramble for Africa, as a lot of people have called it. Okay, now, first of all, it's important to get down two key terms. Imperialism itself is all about extending your power over other countries or acquiring colonies. So it's all about trying to expand to other areas. When you guys studied America last year, you probably learned about how America expanded their own empire and acquired their own lands, like when they conquered the nation of Hawaii, or when they were in the Spanish-American War and they gained more territories for their empire, if you want to call it an empire. Now, colonization is all about setting up specific colonies. So it's the act of actually creating colonies. And there were two different kind of strategies when it came to colonization. You could set up settler colonies where the Europeans went there and they lived there. For example, the Americas. Europeans came from Spain and England and France, and they moved there. They wanted those colonies so they could expand their empire, not to just make the people there do all the work, but the Europeans went there, they did work, and they took the land for themselves. Same thing happened in South Africa. You had a group of people that went there and basically went there to live there, to expand their lands, to explore, to find new resources. This tended to be what people were looking for before industrialization. So after industrialization, things very much change. They become politically dependent states. These are places where Europeans don't necessarily conquer a land to stay there. They conquer a land to make the people there do the work. So the Europeans come and go. They basically, Africa's the best example. They conquered many nations in Africa and basically made the people there provide resources for their home nation, for their home country. So England might take a bunch of land on the east coast of Africa and make it a politically dependent state where they have to provide resources for England. Now, it's important to realize that during this time, we see a lot of changes in imperialism. Certainly, Europeans had been trying to conquer new lands for a while, basically since the Americas were, quote unquote, discovered by them. But this imperialism kind of became more dominating. They wanted more control. They wanted to acquire land very quickly. The Europeans set up governors that would basically run the territory for them. And it was all about exploiting as much resources as possible. Still to this day, a lot of the major mines in Africa are owned by European companies that were able to get success and buy the land from European governments during this imperialism era. But if we've already talked about the Americas being colonized and imperialized, and Asia got colonized and imperialized early too, why is Africa like the last place on the world to be imperialized by Europeans? Of course, Europeans had very advanced weapons, so that kind of gave them an advantage elsewhere. But why was Africa so late? I mean, let's look at the map. If you look at the map, you can probably see why. What makes Africa so difficult to conquer? Hopefully this is where you pause the video and you answered it out loud to the substitute teacher. Probably not, though. As you can see on the map, see that gigantic desert at the top? that's difficult to cross. See that giant green area? Guess what that is? That's a rainforest. And that rainforest is extremely dense. So it's very difficult to travel along the rainforest. It's very difficult to travel in the desert region, making Africa very difficult to conquer. Not to mention, there was a lot of disease. So difficult to travel in, too many jungles, too many deserts, and diseases like malaria, which was carried by mosquitoes. Now, you may ask yourself, why were all these Europeans wanting to colonize in the first place? Why would they go to another territory, use their own military resources to conquer land? Now, certainly there's economic reasons. We have capitalism dominating much of Europe, and they want resources like rubber and oil and tin. To keep those four factors of production going, you got to have resources, you got to have that capital. Now, most European nations don't have these things. Not all of them have rubber, oil, or tin. In fact, have you heard of any oil reserves in Europe? Not really. Rubber doesn't even grow in that cold of a climate. So these resources were something that you could get from Africa and from South America. But Africa provided a new land rich with these resources that they could try to get. Furthermore, there was some political reasons. A lot of European nations had rivals, like the UK had rivals with France. Uh, the early Germany had rivals with a few countries, Italy, etc. So you had rivals, and you wanted to kind of beat them. There was a lot of pride on the line. You wanted to show that you were powerful. And what better way than having a lot of colonies? So the UK was seen as extremely powerful because they had the most colonies, tons of them, tons of colonies in Africa, tons of colonies around the world. But France had tons of colonies too. They were very dominant as well. But on top of this, it also showed off your military strength, your weaponry strength. And the Europeans had a lot of very advanced weapons during this time. We're getting close to those world wars, so they're building up to being able to fight each other eventually. And lastly is the concept that Europeans felt like they were better than other people. This kind of goes along with some theories of like Darwinism and evolution at the time, that those that survived, those that were the strongest, were the fittest. Those that were the strongest are clearly better than others. So it became kind of an idea culturally that Europeans thought they were better than other cultures around the world, better than people from Asia and people from Africa and people from the Americas, thinking that they were better than the native people from those lands because they felt like they were stronger and that they did things right. Certainly, we know there's no real scientific hierarchy of genetics or race or anything like that. But the Europeans at this time were feeling like they were better than everyone, that they were clearly the fittest in this scenario. On top of it, they got the idea of what's called white man's burden. You may have heard of this in American history class. It's essentially the idea that these Europeans felt like it was their burden, their responsibility to take care of all these other native people that didn't know any better. So, like, they felt like the other countries weren't doing things the right way they were supposed to be doing. So they brought things like education and Catholicism and tried to spread religion and education to these different regions because they thought they were kind of getting left behind. So in a way, they were basically thinking they were spreading civilization. But certainly the people in the Americas and in Africa and Asia had what we would call civilization today. Just the Europeans had certainly a biased perspective, seeing themselves as much better than the other people. They saw themselves as spreading civilization, despite the fact that some of the cities in North America were larger than European cities before the interaction of Columbus and beyond. And many of the cities and inventions of